pushing the audio.
So if I turn it on, welcome to everyone. We'll be starting in a few minutes, couple of minutes.
Recording in progress.
Can I confirm if the sound check has been done, please? Thank you. Welcome. Welcome to this special event on leveraging urbanization for food systems transformation. Sorry it started so late, but thanks for bearing with us. Just to say to begin with that this session is being live streamed and recorded. Interpretation is available in the 6 UN languages. We will be having Q&A at the end, in which case if you could raise your hand to pose a question. And do use the hashtags UNFSS 2023 Food Systems Global Goals to follow the conversation online and to post online. So welcome to all of those online and welcome to all of those on the room. My name is Dr. Corinna Hawkes. I'm the Director of the Division of Food Systems and Food Safety here at FAO, where we lead the work stream across the organisation on urban agri-food systems transformation. We are here because we are part of the Urban Food Systems Coalition, the Sustainable and Inclusive Urban Food Systems Coalition, and we are co-hosting this event with the Transforming Urban Rural Food Systems Consortium. So the Urban Food Systems Coalition, we are facilitated to FAO along with the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition, the World Organization of United Cities and Local Governments, the Eclay City Network, along with numerous partners such as the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact, civil society organizations, and UN agencies and academic institutions. And we're co-hosting it, as I said, with the Transforming Urban Rural Food Systems Consortium, TURFS, which is a coalition of the former United Nations Food Systems Summit Action Track Chairs Organization, including GAIN, EAT, WWF, CARE, Club of Rome, and C40. So we are delighted as co-hosts to welcome you here today. You'll notice that the event is called Leveraging Urbanization for Food Systems Transformation. And I wanted to pick up for a moment on this term, urbanization. We haven't used the term cities, we haven't used the term urban, important as they are. So I just want to spend a moment on this term, urbanization. And if we understand urbanization as essentially an economic process of intensification of resources, of intensification of goods and services, of commodity flows, of markets, and of course of people. What we're talking about is the intensification of power and a rebalancing of power. And that potentially means that cities and subnational governments are potentially in a much more powerful position than before to make change in food systems. And with power, of course, comes responsibility. And cities have potentially the power to make change in their own food systems. Firstly, in their own food systems. But secondly, they can impact food systems in the territories, in the rural territories around them. They can impact in food systems anywhere around the world where they source food from, way beyond their immediate territories. And in so doing, they impact their food systems of their nations and their regions. And of course, there are many cities that are small, which are large, and of an intermediary size. So when we consider that, we should move from the idea that municipal governments and the stakeholders they work with are marginal players in food systems, to understand that are doing things subnationally at a smaller scale, to understand that they are lead players affecting change in food systems at all scales, nationally, regionally, globally, as well as in cities themselves. But unless we convert the potential for this power into actual power and taking responsibility with that power, we will lose the tremendous opportunity. And that means that cities need to be empowered to make these changes. That is absolutely critical, and cities should be clear in demanding what they need to do this. So today, in this event, we will be hearing about efforts to link cities and national governments, and hearing about the progress and the actions that cities have been making, which will further serve to illustrate why we need to recast the role of cities, not as minor players, but as major players in food systems transformation at all scales. We're going to start the event with an overview of urbanization, as recently published in the State of Food Security and Nutrition of 2023 on urbanization, and we're delighted that my colleague Marco Sanchez, who co-led the development of the report, is here to share key highlights with us after the launch of the report in July. And then we'll have the honor to speak to some distinguished panelists to discuss the actions they are taking, and we'll end with a Mentimeter poll and some questions and answers from the floor. So I'd like to start by inviting Marco Sanchez, Deputy Director of the Agri-Food Economics Division here at FAO, to give a few remarks to introduce the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Corina. Distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen, today I will be sharing some insights from the 23 edition of the State of Food Security and Nutrition in the World report that we call the SOFI, and particularly focusing on urbanization and, importantly, what it means for agri-food systems transformation. So, unfortunately, the recently launched SOFI report confirmed that the world is not on track to achieve global hunger, food security, and nutrition targets by 2030. Now, in past editions of this report, we have identified key drivers for this unfortunate recollection of events. Climate, variability and extremes, conflict, economic slowdowns and downturns have been identified as key drivers of food insecurity and malnutrition in the world. However, this year the report started to look at mega trends, what we call mega trends. And urbanization is a mega trend which is accelerating in many parts of the world. Specifically, the SOFI report looks at how urbanization is transforming agri-food systems with important implications for food security and nutrition. A key observation that relates to what Corina was referring to earlier on is that we find that what happens in cities is increasingly affecting what happens beyond cities. And that's an important observation that I want to make here today. Now, growing urbanization is driving changes throughout agri-food systems, from production, processing, distribution, and procurement to consumer behavior. And this is bringing a lot of challenges to agri-food systems, but also opportunities to make healthy diets more affordable and accessible to all. Now, let me tell you a little bit about the challenges. Some challenges include, for example, a greater availability of cheaper, convenience, pre-prepared and fast foods, often energy-dense and high in fats, sugars, and or salts, which can, of course, affect or lead to malnutrition. Insufficient availability of vegetables and fruits to meet the daily requirements of healthy diets for everyone in the world. Exclusion of small farmers from formal value chains, and loss of lands and natural capital due to urban expansion. As for the opportunities, urbanization can result in longer, more formal, and complex food value chains that expand income-generating opportunities and activities in off-farm employment, especially for women and the youth, and increase also the variety of nutritious foods. Moreover, farmers often gain better access to agricultural inputs and services as urban areas grow closer and closer to rural areas. But the traditional rural-urban divide doesn't help us to understand these challenges and opportunities from urbanization. Due to population growth and economic development, small and intermediate cities and towns are increasingly connecting the space between the rural hinterland and the large cities. Understanding the challenges and opportunities from urbanization then requires a rural-urban continuum lens that captures the growing connectivity across urban, peri-urban, and rural areas. To see the difference that this urban-rural continuum lens or approach can make in practice, let us look at the prevalence of moderate or severe food insecurity. This indicator gives us the percentage of people who face an irregular access to adequate food in a country, in a region of the world, or in the whole world. In this figure that you can see here, globally, food insecurity is clearly a much more serious problem in rural areas compared to urban areas. That is what we typically know. However, the food security picture may change completely if the socioeconomic disparities within urban and within peri-urban areas are considered. So, let's now consider the same indicator, but across a rural-urban continuum that is comprised of 10 segments, geographical segments, starting from the very, very large cities all the way up to rural areas located 2 or more hours from a city or a town. As you can see in this figure, the levels of moderate or severe food insecurity across urban areas and peri-urban areas are found to be similar to or even higher than those in rural areas in some countries analyzed. The rural-urban continuum approach allows us to locate pockets of food insecurity in cities that need attention and may also be resulting from urbanization itself. This approach also allowed us to see that food demand patterns of cities seem to be increasingly spreading across the rural-urban continuum, and that is a very important point to make. While already quite advanced in Asia and in Latin America, changes in food demand across the rural-urban continuum are accelerating in Africa, where the rates of food insecurity are precisely the highest in the world. This figure that I show here now shows the share of food purchases relative to total food consumption among households in 11 African countries. As can be seen in this figure, the shares of food purchases among households living in urban areas are high as we would expect. But the shares are also surprisingly high across the rural-urban continuum, even for rural households living very, very far from cities. Given the increasing connectivity, peri-urban and rural households are then more exposed to consumption patterns similar to those of urban areas. So what we do in cities, colleagues, is very important for peri-urban and rural areas, particularly in terms of food consumption. Indeed, this other figure shows purchased processed food as a share of total food consumption across the rural-urban continuum in the same 11 African countries. Clearly, consumption of processed foods, including highly processed foods here, is higher in urban areas, as we would expect as well. But it does not decline dramatically, moving to peri-urban and rural areas. While not shown here in this graph, I must say that consumption of vegetables, fruits, and fats, and oils relative to total food consumption is found to be uniform across the rural-urban continuum. Such degree of dietary convergence across the rural-urban continuum indicates that purchase patterns between urban and rural areas are not substantially different as we thought they were. Again, consumption patterns in cities are then spreading across the rural-urban continuum. Urbanization is transforming agri-food systems, and cities are increasingly influencing sustainable development for all. To leverage urbanization for agri-food systems transformation, we need investments in infrastructure, public goods, and enhanced capacities to leverage the progressive connectivity between urban, peri-urban, and rural areas. In the face of a gradual convergence in dietary patterns across the rural-urban continuum, we need policies and legislation to promote healthy food environments and to empower consumers to make nutritious food choices everywhere, and importantly, in cities. Public investment in research and development needs to be increased to develop technologies and innovations to support such healthier food environment. But of course, implementing these solutions require that global agri-food systems, governance mechanisms, and institutions cross all sectoral and administrative boundaries and rely more and more on subnational and local governments. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed for that excellent summary of the key points of the report this year. Thank you, Marco. So we're now going to go into a panel discussion, and I'd like to start by introducing the panel. We're delighted to welcome Segundo Enrique Regalado Gamonal, Vice Minister of Policies and Supervision of Agrarian Development of the Ministry of Agrarian Development and Irrigation of Peru, and President of the Multi-Sectoral Commission for Food and Nutrition Security. Also, a very warm welcome to Mayor of the City of Chefchaouen, Mohamed Sefayani. Welcome. Good to have you. And to Vice Mayor, Ms. Anna Scavuzzo, Vice Mayor of Milan, in charge of food policy and Deputy Mayor of Education. Amy Pope, Director General-elect of the International Organization of Migration, IOM. Prior to recently joining IOM, Amy served as the Senior Advisor on Migration to President Biden in the United States. And João Campari, Global Leader of the World Wildlife Fund's Food Practice, and recently the Chair of the UN Food Systems Summit Action Track 3, and now Principal of Transitioning Urban and Rural Food Systems Consortium. I mentioned them earlier, TURFs. And then Jane Battersby, Dr. Jane Battersby, an urban geographer based at the University of Cape Town and a leading academic voice on urban food systems, and currently leading the development of a new report to be published next year by the high-level panel of experts on the World Committee on Food Security on strengthening urban and peri-urban food systems. So welcome to the panel. Now, Amy, I know that you have to step out. Are you able to answer the first question? Do you have time?
Yes, I'd love to.
Okay, so I'll have to change the order and ask you. So I'm going to be asking questions about this city government national linkages, but also just about the actions that our panelists are taking. So what are two things that you're doing at the International Organization on Migration to work with local, national governments, other stakeholders on sustainable food systems?
First of all, thank you for having me and including me in this important panel on the... I'll try again. There you go. Okay, so I'll start again by warmly thanking you for hosting this important conversation and bringing together these partners who are committed to advancing better food systems for all people. At the first instance, I just want to make the connection, which I hope is obvious to all, but I think maybe needs a bit of underlining, between the connection of migration and displacement and food security. I mean, we see it all the time that these are inextricably linked to one another, whether it's across borders, communities that are migrating, individuals who are migrating from one country to another, or especially when it comes to food insecurity within a country, from rural areas to urban areas. Displacement is both a driver and an outcome of food insecurity. And we also know that climate change is going to exacerbate the situation, which will then exacerbate displacement, particularly for the most poor, the most vulnerable communities who now live in rural areas. We only need to look at communities like those in a place like Badoa, Somalia, where the rural communities there, facing their 6th season of drought, primarily communities who are agricultural or pastoral, have no other option but to move in the millions. And they're moving in a situation where they are even more vulnerable, have even fewer options for their own food security moving forward. So creating these links and understanding between how these factors are intersecting is critically important. Now, in terms of the 2 key areas of work that I want to highlight, the first is our engagement with the mayors, because frankly, this is where it all plays out. You know, we can have the most important and relevant national or federal policies, but the real life impact, the real life pressures, the real life opportunities are happening in the cities with our mayors. And so bringing the mayors into a conversation and action plan is critical. We do this by co-steering the mayor's mechanism. We do this alongside the United Cities and local governments and the Mayor's Migration Council, and we do it in partnership with our sister agency, the UNHCR. What it does is really work with mayors to understand the impacts of displacement on their systems for response. So, for example, in Bogota, Colombia, we established a nutrition reception center for migrant and refugee children and mothers so that the most vulnerable communities coming into the city of Bogota, and particularly young children, pregnant mothers, breastfeeding mothers, would have access to nutrition. But that kind of very practical support done in conjunction with a mayor in recognition of the impact and the real vulnerabilities that the increased urbanization was having is critical. The other is that IOM is a strategic partner of the Global Cities Fund, which is led by the Mayor's Migration Council. And this is a fund that's developed for the unmet needs of cities as they support the migrants, the refugees, and the internally displaced people, and as they try to meet their unmet needs. For example, in Johannesburg, they are a recipient of the fund, and they developed a project to improve the food security for the migrants, refugees, and IDPs who were living in primarily homeless situations, connecting them to urban agricultural programs throughout the city. So that very concrete, working with the mayors as partners is really, and ensuring they have the resources they need to address the unmet needs is critical to making this system work for more people.
Thank you very much indeed, making this really important point about migration, which of course is only going to increase as the crises upon us advance, including climate change and others. Again, further emphasizing the importance of this engagement with the cities that you so eloquently spoke about. Thank you very much for highlighting that. I'd like now to turn to you, Vice Minister. Cities in Peru have been advancing the urban food systems agenda. There are policy councils and governance mechanisms and networks between municipalities. Congratulations for the work that has been done in Peru. What are 2 key advancements that you have set in motion in Peru to facilitate this coordinated action between city, local, and national governments, given that you are speaking from the national level? Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Un saludo a la mesa de honor, a todos los presentes que nos acompañan el día de hoy en este tema tan importante. Efectivamente, en el Perú venimos trabajando un sólido trabajo articulado, consensuado con todos los actores, ¿no? Gobierno nacional, gobierno regional, gobierno local, la sociedad civil. Justo mi antecesora hacía referencia, ¿no? Ese trabajo articulado que nosotros debemos realizar con todos los actores. Sin ello, no podemos hacer nada. Como gobierno nacional, no podemos estar solo a esta problemática. En ese sentido, como país, nosotros resaltamos la importancia que tienen estos mecanismos para lograr la transición hacia sistemas alimentarios resilientes e inclusivos. Nosotros, como nivel país, como gobierno nacional, una de las estrategias que hemos desarrollado es que tanto el tema de seguridad alimentaria y nutrición han sido declarados de interés nacional y de necesidad pública. Y justamente este tipo de acciones permite a que todos los actores involucrados podamos desarrollar estrategias para poder tener una seguridad alimentaria sostenible y adecuada para que toda nuestra población, los más necesitados, puedan tener acceso a alimentos seguros, nutritivos, oportunos. En ese marco, nosotros hemos creado la Comisión Multisectorial de Seguridad Alimentaria y Nutricional, la COMSAN, la cual es multisectorial, es permanente, en la que tenemos en este momento 20 acciones potentes, 20 acciones directamente que hacemos que lleguen a todos nuestros beneficiarios en Perú. Aparte de ello, nosotros tenemos otros esfuerzos a nivel de gobiernos locales. Por ejemplo, la Municipalidad Metropolitana de Lima aprobó una ordenanza, Marco de Promoción de la Agricultura Urbana, como estrategia de gestión ambiental, seguridad alimentaria, inclusión social y desarrollo económico en la provincia de Lima. ¿Y cuál es su objetivo de esta ordenanza? Es establecer lineamientos generales y en el marco conceptual y estratégico para promover la agricultura urbana como una estrategia de gestión ambiental, provisión de alimentos y desarrollo económico local e inclusión social. También hay experiencias al interior del país. Así tenemos, por ejemplo, en Huancayo, Arequipa, Piura, Maynas, firmaron acuerdos para fortalecer el nexo de los sistemas agroalimentarios de la zona rural y urbana, con miras a fortalecer la articulación entre productores, mercados, ferias, intercambio de conocimientos y prácticas agroecológicas entre zonas urbanas y periurbanas. Nosotros tenemos como una estrategia en Perú los mercados itinerantes. Forma parte de estas 20 acciones que les decía de la Comisión Multisectorial de Seguridad Alimentaria y Nutricional, ¿no? ¿Y en qué consiste? En traer a nuestros pequeños productores de la chacra a la olla, como se llama ya, sin intermediarios, directamente para que ellos puedan vender sus productos a los consumidores finales. Son acciones, como les decía, potentes. Nosotros tenemos ahorita en este momento una ejecución, un gran plan con Punche Perú, que son más de 1.040 millones destinados para diferentes acciones, entre ellos esta acción que es los mercados itinerantes. Asimismo, la Municipalidad de Lima también tuvo la creación del Consejo de Sistema Alimentario en Lima Metropolitana, ¿no? Cuya finalidad es planificar, organizar este tipo de acciones, buscar estrategias alineadas con agendas internacionales relacionadas a alimentación, cambio climático y sostenibilidad. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much indeed, Vice Minister, for sharing such a positive example of a national government that understands the importance of pulling levers at the city level and at the peri-urban level as well. That's a really inspiring example of a nation that understands that. Thank you. I now want to ask the same question, but coming from a mayoral perspective, if I might, Mayor Safiani. What are two key advancements you have set in motion in your city in Morocco to facilitate joint food systems actions between the city and the national level?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Excellences, partenaires, collègues, tout d'abord, permettez-moi de vous remercier pour l'invitation à rejoindre cette importante session dans cette période d'inventaire du sommet des Nations Unies sur les systèmes alimentaires. Je m'exprime aujourd'hui en tant que maire de la ville de Chefchaouen, une ville intermédiaire du nord du Maroc, appelée la ville peinte en bleu et qui est engagée dans le vert, et en tant qu'envoyé spécial des villes et gouvernements locaux unis, CGLU, pour les systèmes alimentaires, et en tant aussi que président du Forum mondial des villes intermédiaires de CGLU. Les différentes crises auxquelles le monde fait face aujourd'hui ont clairement démontré l'importance de la coopération en toutes les sphères gouvernementales et toutes les parties prenantes. Les gouvernements locaux régionaux jouent un rôle clé dans la réalisation de l'agenda 2030 en localisant les objectifs de développement durable. À mesure que les espaces urbains deviennent de plus en plus le lieu de résidence de la majorité de la population mondiale, les gouvernements locaux régionaux doivent être davantage reconnus comme des acteurs clés dans les systèmes alimentaires. Ils sont en première ligne pour assurer à toutes et à tous un accès équitable à une alimentation nutritive et une maîtrise sur les systèmes alimentaires qui les impactent. De plus, des stratégies alimentaires urbaines et territoriales à travers le monde ont été pionnières dans la transition vers des nouveaux systèmes alimentaires plus justes, allant de l'approvisionnement public durable à la planification alimentaire et aussi de la gestion des déchets à l'agriculture urbaine. Face aux crises alimentaires actuelles, il est évident que nous devons changer nos modèles mondiaux de production et de consommation et opter pour des modèles de solidarité et de proximité. Cela inclut la reconnaissance accrue de la valeur du lien entre les espaces urbains et ruraux et des systèmes alimentaires à l'échelle des villes et des régions. À cet égard, les villes intermédiaires se sont positionnées à l'avant-garde de la mise en œuvre des politiques de croissance verte nécessaires pour accompagner les transitions telles que celles énoncées dans le pacte de CGLU pour l'avenir. Et si je prends l'exemple de ma ville, Chefchaouen, nous avons mis en avant les liens intrinsèques entre les politiques alimentaires et le patrimoine culturel de la ville et son contour rural. D'ailleurs, Chefchaouen a été classé patrimoine immatériel de l'humanité par l'UNESCO dans le thème Dieta méditerranéen, un mode de vie méditerranéen. Avec d'autres villes du contour méditerranéen, nous sommes 7 villes, 7 pays reconnus par l'UNESCO. C'était un dossier commun avec d'autres villes de l'Italie, l'Espagne, la Grèce, la Croatie, le Chypre et le Portugal. Nous avons des plans d'action pour la promotion des politiques alimentaires ancestrales méditerranéennes, saines, inclusives et résilientes, tout en préservant notre patrimoine commun et le mode de vie méditerranéen, et ceci avec l'appui des gouvernements nationaux. Et d'ailleurs, en septembre, au niveau de Chefchaouen, nous avons inauguré la Casa de la Dieta méditerranéenne, ou la Maison de la Dieta méditerranéenne, qui va être ouverte aux citoyens et aux touristes aussi. Dans mon pays, le Maroc, plusieurs programmes très importants ont été réalisés, comme Maroc Vert et actuellement Génération Verte, et aussi l'Initiative nationale de développement humain, INDH, qui appuie entre autres la promotion des actrices et acteurs de l'économie sociale et solidaire dans le domaine agricole et autres secteurs. Excellence, malgré l'importance évidente des gouvernements locaux et régionaux, le système multilatéral devrait reconnaître davantage leur rôle essentiel, bien que des progrès positifs soient en cours, comme en témoigne l'organisation de cet événement très important. Le collectif des gouvernements locaux et régionaux célèbre les avancées réalisées en lien entre les agendas locaux et mondiaux, notamment grâce à notre collaboration avec le Comité pour la sécurité alimentaire mondiale, CFS. Je voudrais souligner l'importance du thème proposé pour le programme de travail du CFS pour 2024-2027, qui prévoit une meilleure implication des gouvernements locaux et régionaux avec le CFC. En tant qu'envoyé spécial des villes et gouvernements locaux unis pour le système alimentaire, je souligne qu'il est essentiel de se demander quel modèle de gouvernance locale, nationale, globale doit être conçu pour assurer des systèmes alimentaires durables, inclusifs, ainsi qu'une gestion appropriée des biens communs. Les biens communs ne sont pas seulement des choses et des endroits. Ce sont des pratiques, des façons de faire, des connaissances communautaires, des ressources essentielles, des proximités. Fondés sur le pacte de CGLU pour l'avenir, nous considérons les biens communs comme étant essentiels à la vie, nos systèmes alimentaires, nos écosystèmes, les éléments nutritifs et le bien-être pour tous. Et cette compréhension implique donc d'inclure les communautés locales dans cette dynamique. Enfin, je peux dire qu'il est temps de construire ensemble ces nouveaux modèles qui soutiennent les plus vulnérables, prennent soin d'eux. Ils nous permettent d'inspirer des actions conjointes et solidaires. Et les gouvernements locaux régionaux doivent jouer un rôle important dans ces actions multi-acteurs et multiniveaux. Je vous remercie. Shukran jazilan.
Thank you very much indeed for making some critically important points there about the role of intermediary-sized cities. It's not just about the large cities, but the intermediary size and the smaller as well. About the importance of the roles of cities in growth policies, of course, very important to nation states as well, but also the power of cities to celebrate cultural heritage and the exciting aspects of culture around food. And then again, with your call for a new governance mechanism to really link together these multiple levels, global, regional, national and city. So thank you very much for those excellent remarks. Vice Mayor of Milan, you are in charge of food policy and have done an amazing job. Milan is, of course, an extraordinarily famous example of your focus on food. Where have you been working to take forward this joint food systems working between city, local and national governments?
Thank you very much for inviting Milan, but also Milan Urban Food Policy Pact as a whole. I am very happy to be here, also to have the chance to reply to your questions, starting from the experience in Milan, but also involving a huge number of cities all over the world, also because this dimension of cities can fit to each city. So each of us is in charge and has to find a way to collaborate with multi-level governance approach. And so we can work easily together with similar cities, but also trying to understand how to promote this multi-level approach also with very different cities from ours. And each city can give its own contribution to the debate and to the discussion. First of all, I would like to underline that Milan has a sort of commitment to establish multi-level dialogues, maybe in our DNA. We want to cooperate and collaborate inside the city and outside the city. And we would like to promote this method of work inside the community and with the communities in a network. In 2015, we launched the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact. At the beginning, we were 100 of cities. Now we are 270, very different one from each other. But it's one of the most important legacy of the exposition in 2015. But nowadays is still so strong because it's a very pragmatical approach. And so the first reply I would like to give you is, first of all, we are fully convinced that this is the way, and we don't discuss if we can have an exchange with this, with a multi-level governance approach, but how. And so a pragmatical approach. From city, you have a pragmatical solution, a pragmatical approach and a way to find solutions. Through the pact, mayors can work together. So networking is very important because you are stronger than each mayor by itself. And this is the second point. You can promote multi-level governance approach, not just because you are convinced that this is the way, but because there's a huge community of mayors that want to propose the same approach. And so the connection with different government levels is the key to achieve also even greater results. We can collect data for you, and you can use our pragmatical approach also to evaluate and have an assessment of policy. So we don't propose to the different level of governments a devolution to the cities of this issue, and we don't want to have a sort of opposition to the other level of governance, but we want to cooperate also because the focus on people can be reached if you can engage people. And so community must be actor and have to play a key role in this game, because without people, you don't have any transformation of any urban system. I can just mention two experiences also in this multi-level approach. I would like to, for instance, mention the bridge among cities and countries that the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact is promoting with national dialogues. And so a chance to meet inside a dialogue that has cities, but also local government, national and regional governments. For instance, in Seoul and in Bandung last month, we had very good experience in this activity. We would like to carry on. For instance, we are working together with Eurocities in Europe and with ASEAN in Asia region, also to promote, for instance, the possibility to have a project on multi-level governance that have some fund also, because without money you can do a lot of things, but not exactly what you would like to do. And for instance, we had for also for cities a project called Clever Food in the program of the European Union. It aims at developing a comparative analysis of urban food policy in 15 cities of the EU countries. And it's very important because it starts from cities. And the last mention I would like to have is with ASEAN in Asia, also because we are trying to have a worldwide glance, not just in an area instead of another. And we have been working with ASEAN since 2 years, and we would like to involve representation of cities for each member state to contribute to the regional strategies on food system. And for instance, the example of Bandung last year had been very important with a lot of cities coming from the different countries of ASEAN. These are some examples, but I would like to mention once again this pragmatical approach, because I think that it's very important to carry out with this multi-level governance, focusing attention that a mayor has to reply to citizens, but we need framework, and framework can be but based on what in communities can happen. And so we have to go on together, and I think that is the good way also we would like to propose in the Urban Food System Coalition to enhance these innovative approaches of multi-level governance and to have the chance also to involve some other cities in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vice Mayor. Thank you. I think you've made it very clear that we need a really good, pragmatic framework that is based on the real needs of citizens on the ground, and making the point about mayors working together, of course, as Milan Urban Food Policy Pact. And our colleague here as president of the Intermediary Cities Network of the World Organization of United Cities and Local Governments are two examples of the kind of networks that can create this conversation. I also just wanted to pick up on the point about cooperation between nation states and cities. It's not about displacing responsibility onto one and onto the other, but about actually this important form of cooperation. Now, João Campari, we're here in Rome to discuss progress since the UN Food Systems Summit of 2021. Could you highlight a couple of innovative strategies in cities that you'd like to share with us today?
Thank you, Corina. Good afternoon, everybody. WWF, I'm the global leader for food systems at WWF. And WWF was one of the 6 organizations that was here in Rome 2 years ago. We led the action tracks of the UN Food Systems Summit alongside EAT, GAIN, CARE, ECOD, and the Club of Rome. And one thing before we talk about innovation, one thing that we realized during the summit is that although global commitments and global deliveries are necessary to transform food systems for people and planet, global commitments are highly insufficient to deliver the change that we need to effect on the ground. So realizing this shortcoming, the 6 organizations joined forces with C40, to create the TURFS consortium. TURFS is the Transforming Urban Rural Food Systems. And our presence, the consortium, is present in more than 100 countries. And we seek to provide tailored support and help mobilize the resources needed for cities and key local stakeholders to implement their commitments and lever their agility to drive food systems transformation. So cities became a core component of the work that the 7 organizations now are doing. The consortium recognizes that cities have an enormous potential, but they are currently underserved as a constituency, both in terms of multilateral support and funding. So our intent is thus to help empower cities with the tools, resources, and expertise they need to accelerate action. To that end, we are building a cohesive program to unlock the power of cities, including linking cities and regenerative agricultural landscapes. Now, many mayors and many cities are already leading action in this space, including those of the cities under the C40 Good Food Cities Accelerator and our own at WWF, the One Planet Challenge. With these, over 100 cities have identified food systems actions in their Race to Zero commitments, and over 200 cities have come under the Milan Urban Food Pact. And the innovations that we have seen since the summit, two that I can mention, it's about food boards and food councils. Many cities have already developed these types of infrastructure for governance. Some food boards, for example, bring together internal departments within the city administration and cross-sectoral coordination spaces. And where needed, also external-facing platforms to integrate academic institutions, city administration, civil society organizations, small-scale producers, and the private sectors are coming on board city councils, city food councils. These are really amazing spaces for multi-stakeholder and multi-sector collaborations. Close to home at WWF, one of the innovations that we're bringing together, and again, recognizing the need to move from global to national and local level action, we created a platform called Solving the Great Food Puzzle. Because we do believe that the response and the innovations that are needed to change food systems are highly contextual, and it varies from place to place. So, the Great Food Puzzle, we just have a component that is called the 3 R's that aims to inform what is the right innovation that delivers the right impact in the right place. Okay, so I think that there is a lot of action that needs to happen, and I invite everyone here at FAO today to think about what has happened since the UN Food Systems Summit 2 years ago. The movements have not been enough. We need to accelerate action to deliver a food systems for people and planet on the ground. And cities are the best place for us to connect consumers and producers. Thank you, Corinne. I'll stop here. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much for highlighting the reality that cities are still underserved and could do so much more if they were better served, if they were empowered to do so and to unlock that power. But it's really exciting, I have to say, João, to hear about these new initiatives. There's so much space for more actors to come in and to connect and to really band together as a movement for change. So turning to you, Jane, we've heard some examples here about action in cities, examples of joint work between national and local governments. And based on your own experience, based on what you've heard, what progress where do you think we are? What progress do you think we've made in terms of this multi-level food systems governance?
Thank you, Karina. So I'm here wearing 3 hats, effectively. That of a scholar working in the African context, that of a researcher working for the high-level panel of experts, and that of as a member of the Urban Food Systems Coalition. And I'm going to speak briefly to all of those hats and then possibly put a fourth hat on at the end. So in the African context, we have had this long history of antipathy towards the urban. National governments have not really liked urban government very much, and urban governments have not really spoken about food very much. And so what we have is this kind of complex history of power imbalances between urban governments and national governments, a framing of food as predominantly rural. But we're living in a reality that the African continent is already over 50% urban and will be 75% by 2050. Not only that, but many of these residents will be living in cities that have yet to be built. So the kinds of planning and policy decisions we take now lock us into path dependency, lock into the futures of future citizens. However, what we're seeing is this increased interest in localization of the SDGs, these conversations about, cities are the battle where sustainable development will be won and lost. And the same story is true for food. And so it's really exciting to see quite a full room here today. And as the person who's co-drafting the high-level panel of experts report on strengthening urban and peri-urban food systems for food security in the context of urbanization and rural transformation, what we're trying to do is take a deep dive into understanding what urban and peri-urban food systems look like, how they link to rural areas, how they link to each other, and how food fits in with other local and national agendas. Because I think making an argument that food alone is not going to drive us forward. I think we need to understand what are the imperatives that drive urban government, what are the imperatives that drive national government, and how can we bring those conversations together. And so we're trying to do a deep analysis of governance issues, around what are the barriers around vertical and horizontal governance, what are some of the capacity challenges in the local government, particularly in the African context. Because if we don't take these issues on board, and if we just go with aspirational visions, what we're going to do is sort of roll out numbers of programs that are going to be doomed simply because we haven't really fully understand an integrated context. And so I think there's a really important component there, which moves me on to the third hat, which is talking about the role of the Urban Food Systems Coalition. Because the Urban Food Systems Coalition emerged initially in 2019 with the establishment of an Urban Food Systems Working Group co-housed by FAO and GAIN. And that led to a series of engagements at side events at the UN Food Systems Summit and has now emerged as a coalition. The coalition is attempting to link national and subnational governments. We've done a series of stakeholder engagements across 7 diverse countries, and recently a workshop was held in Hanoi on cities and local governments accelerating cohesive and inclusive food systems transformation. And this work really sought to do some of those things I've spoken about. It identified barriers. It responded to requests for guidelines on elements that were deemed important by participants. So where the coalition is going forwards now is working on those guidelines, starting to develop a set of principles for webinars on multi-level governance, focusing on specific entry points, because multi-level governance is broad and quite hard to grapple with. So if you go through specific entry points, those conversations can open up. There's also an effort to finalize those guidelines. So ultimately what's going on is this effort to aggregate information, to draw connections across countries and across governance, building and sharing evidence, and mobilizing urban administrative capacity. So that's kind of the 3 hats. The 4th hat is many, many years ago, I worked in a bookshop doing stock taking. And stock taking is tedious work. You start at the bottom shelf, you work to the top shelf. It's painful, it's boring, but it's got to be done, right? And it's not about looking at the shelves and saying, oh, it looks good, we'll open again tomorrow. It's about, what's in place, what's missing, what's in the right place, and how do we make sure those systems are in place before we move on? And so I think that's the question. How do we take stock taking seriously rather than just a celebratory moment? Thank you.
Thanks for that very insightful point at the end, as well as pointing out really the importance of understanding the imperatives that are faced by cities and their regions, and highlighting the efforts that are being made by the Urban Food Systems Coalition and beyond to try and pull together this framework that was referred to earlier of this multi-level governance and what it really means, and how we can learn from examples that have already been undertaken, as we've learned this afternoon. And now, thank you very much to the panel. I want to give a bit of time for questions at the end, so I will end there from the panel and come back to you when we have questions. Before I go to the floor, we have a quick poll on Mentimeter. So behind you, I'm looking up, but I'm not sure if it's there yet. There should be a unique code and a URL. Can I see if it is there? I can't actually. Oh, I can see it in front of me. Yeah, it's right here. So if you could, we'd really be grateful if you could vote in answer to the question. In your country, what are local city governments doing to accelerate inclusive, sustainable food systems transformation? And if you could select 1 to 3 actions. And you can see that they're translated into French and Spanish as well. Is that working okay? I'll just give you another minute. Okay, should we see what the results are now? See if there's any patterns that have emerged. Okay, let's see what it says here. There's not like one that is absolutely out at the front compared to all of the others. Strengthen decentralization, decisions and funding for policies and programs, improving food environments for healthy diets, improving access to innovative, inclusive finance, enhance inclusivity, and then 5th, increase resilience to multiple shocks and stresses. So improved food environments actually comes out top at the moment. Okay, that's very useful for us. Thank you very much indeed. I'd like to move to a second question. And in this case, if you could rank 1 as highest and 5 as lowest priority, and select the top priority area in the box, if it's showing it, I think we have to move on to the next one. So this is the right one, is it? Okay. So if you could select 1 as the highest, 5 as the lowest priority, and select the top priority area in the box with the 5 options, and any additional answer will be available for other priorities. I hope I've explained that well enough. So this is the second question. What are local city governments doing to accelerate inclusive, sustainable food systems transformation? So we have food systems strategy out at the top there. membership of city networks, working with national government, that's 7, that's good to know, innovation, engagement, inclusive increased access to evidence. So we've clearly got food systems strategies coming out at the top there, followed actually, interesting, by working with national governments. Okay, thank you very much indeed for answering those questions. And I'd now like to see if you have any questions from the floor. I'd like to start by inviting Pramisha Thapailia to speak from the floor. We have an important responsibility at this event to give voice to young people, and I would like to invite Pramisha to make a remark.
Yeah,
Pramisha.
thank you for the opportunity, Corina. My name is Pramisha Thapailia, and I lead Youth Action and Policy Track at World Food Forum. My question is more focused on local level, so might be relevant to our mayor and vice mayor here in the panel. So while we are talking about leveraging urbanization to transform the food systems, it is really important to have targeted interventions, include tailored social safety nets, and ensure a just transition for the most vulnerable population, including women, children, and young people. Earlier, Vice Mayor of Milan also highlighted that without people, we can't have transformation of food systems. So how do you integrate the views of the young people of your city and include them actively from planning to implementation when starting any intervention? Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for making this really important point. Before I go back to the panel, I'd like to ask a few more people to ask questions. Xuan Mai, a national convener of Vietnam, are you here? No, I'm not seeing you in the room here. So we'll move on, please, to Christine Muller, if you'd like to make a comment.
Thank you very much. So I'm Christine Müller, working for the European Commission in DG Climate Action in the Directorate General. Thank you very much for this extraordinary panel. And I wanted to share with you a reflection and a question addressed to anyone who would like to answer the question on the panel. I think indeed that cities are an essential entry point for sustainable food system transformation, as the majority of people indeed lives in cities already today. Also the nutritional problems are centered in cities often, and the level of inequality and also climate vulnerability is the highest in cities. The EU Covenant of Majors for Climate and Energy was launched in 2008, and it brings together thousands of local governments and connects local actions with global initiatives in the context of our global targets, which we all share, notably to achieve zero hunger, climate and biodiversity targets, but also land restoration targets, just referring to the 3 Rio Conventions. So my question actually is related to the new partnership among the FAO Food Systems Hub and the COP28 presidency of the United Arab Emirates. So would it be recommendable, actually, for this new partnership to give a particular focus on cities, while existing or new cities of the future, and their link to rural surroundings? Would it make sense, to work particularly on digital early warning systems, but also food systems, sustainable food information systems, which reach all actors involved by 2027, and such systems also to include, information on Paris-aligned financial flows, so investments into sustainable food systems. Such systems could also include information, on scaling up nutrition, the Sun Movement action, particular action related to delivering healthier diets to school children via homegrown school meals. And include also in these information systems really what this increased purchase power for better nutrition for children would mean for the local agricultural sector, for the agriculture and food industry, and also what it would mean for, measurable and also rewardable impacts for climate and biodiversity in our agricultural landscapes, also in seascapes. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I'll take some more questions from the floor. Lawrence, from Haddad, again, Executive Director, would you like to go ahead?
Thanks. Thank you, Corinna. I have to commend the panel. It's a great panel. End of the day, everyone's tired, but you kept the energy levels up really well, so thank you so much. I really liked your framing, Corinna, at the beginning about the increasing in power, and with that brings responsibility. It reminded me a lot of the so-called Dutch disease, where a country gains a new source of wealth. The source of wealth grows rapidly. It's not governed or managed very well, and it begins to sort of take over the other sectors in the economy and undermine the longer-term vision. And it strikes me that this may be a useful analogy or parallel to this increasing power of urban centers. And it makes me, it reinforces the opinion that I already had, is the importance of governance. Governance to make sure that the poorest within urban settings don't miss out, but also governance to make sure that the growth of the cities leverages and stimulates growth in local rural and national rural areas. And that's what I really like about TERFs. It's really focusing on linking with local food production systems, and that's what I really like about the Coalition on Sustainable and Inclusive Urban Food Systems, because it really focuses on internal dynamics within urban areas. But the question I have for anyone on the panel really is, I imagine to improve governance, you have to overcome the kinds of rivalries that Jane was talking about in South Africa. I'm sure they don't only exist in South Africa. And I was wondering how the mayors and the deputy mayors manage that power relationship with the national. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Lawrence. I think there was a question at the back, someone who's had their hand up a long time. Yes, please introduce yourself before you speak. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Jordan from the Alliance Biodiversity International and CEART, based in Nairobi in the Africa hub of one of these CG centers. My question, one short one, I didn't hear the word African cities, African food cities, so I was wondering whether you have been including this in your overall assessments, but they're also working on food systems and how to improve that. The longer question is rather looking into the urbanization process and what does it mean to actually do the spatial development of cities and metropolitans, looking into that we do have a lot of care from the household level, which needs to be also taken account in their urban areas. So at the moment, I don't see any structural infrastructure planning which allows a gender-sensitive environment to live there, to actually stay there and have short distances to the food environment, but also allowing a proper care and allowing a better workspace. So I was wondering, is there any debate in this regard? If we actually have to have more cities in Africa by 2050, how does it look like? In Kenya, in Nairobi at the moment, we sometimes have distances of 2 to 3 hours between the household up to the workspace. Then how do we take care of the children? Nobody is there anymore. Looking into their civil service in like development as well, and this kind of employment systems we have in the capital cities. So again, what is the planning there, the structural planning also from the mayor system to look into an infrastructure which is much more gender sensitive, allowing parents to take care of their children in a proper way? Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I'll just take one more question. I believe there's one here. Yes.
Okay, my name is Remy Setipin from UN Habitat headquarters in Nairobi, where we have been looking at this issue closely. I'm glad that we are looking now from the food in the context of the transformative force of urbanization. I just want to remind us the context at time that when you look at some of the crises we have witnessed around the world, start in the city because of food. You have the memory of the Arab Spring, for instance. So just to say that this is really a welcome opportunity, and I'm pleased that all of us understand here the connection between food and that urbanization force, as we said earlier, if poorly governed, could actually trigger more issues. What I want to perhaps put on the table is that food is not only city, rural, urban. It's about a territorial approach. And that functional territory is very important. We are working with FAO and others on that particular one. The other angle is what the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact had put on the table. Until we start changing the policy framework, the regulatory framework, it makes our work much harder. So as we engage in the food system and using urbanization, let's be reminded that we have to pay attention to what type of policy landscape and regulatory frameworks we are navigating with to be able to actually make a lasting and resilient type of interventions. So this was my contribution, and welcoming all the contributions and appreciating all colleagues who have made tremendous inputs and insightful contributions. So thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Just to say that we started a little bit over half an hour late, so I will aim to end at 18:30 or just slightly afterwards. So if I could come back to the panel, we have some really diverse set of questions here. Integrating young people into this agenda that we're talking about. Information systems and cities' role in information cities, particularly in the context of COP28 and climate, but other issues as well. This issue of power imbalances and navigating power between the national and the city level. Is there infrastructure planning to connect, to make sure that people are actually close to their sources of food rather than being very far away? And then this point at the end about regulatory frameworks. So I would like to invite the panel to consider these questions and provide some elements of a response. And if I may, I would like to start with you, Jane, at the end. If you could start us out with answering some of these really critical questions.
Absolutely, thank you. I will come to the question on food and infrastructure and planning, because so often when we talk about food insecurity in cities, it's not so much food insecurity in cities, but it's food security of cities. It's food security that's created in some ways by the urban condition. You know, those spatial inequalities that we know have they reinforce economic inequalities, but they also reinforce food inequalities. And so in many ways, the work that actually Karina and I have been doing in South Africa thinks about housing as food policy, transport as food policy. All of these things are shaping our food systems and people's ability to access it. And so on the gender point, I know there are some projects in West Africa that are redeveloping market sites with space for childcare. And that's fundamentally transforming market access, but also the livelihoods of the women. There's also been some work in Tanzania looking at the impacts of putting in toilets in markets and failing to recognize that this increases the cost of women market traders and not the costs of male market traders. So I think the gender element is certainly on the agenda, and I think increasingly the conversation is around thinking about what is specifically urban about the experience of food insecurity and the experience of the food system. And so I think there's a wider set of conversations, which is why I was saying we need to start integrating thinking about urban food with the kind of broader agendas that our cities are trying to reach and try to integrate those two things. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jane, picking on that point about it's not just about food, but these integrated agendas. Mayor, could I come to you for some responses to those questions that were posed?
Thank you. Non, par rapport à la question des jeunes, bien sûr, pour nous, il est hyper important je l'ai dit, une approche inclusive. Et comme on le fait pour les thèmes de climat, parce que c'est indissociable, c'est la nouvelle génération, bien sûr, qui vit ça, et ce sont des challenges. Nous avons, pour le cas de ma ville de Chao, nous avons un conseil municipal des jeunes. Et un des thèmes sur lesquels ils travaillent, c'est le thème de la dieta méditerranéenne ou de food system. Donc c'est important de les impliquer, et c'est une instance consultative avec laquelle, bien sûr, on a des avis consultatifs et on les prend en charge dans le cadre de la planification stratégique de la ville. Et là, je viens à la planification des infrastructures. C'est hyper important, bien sûr, de prendre en charge tout ce qui est food system au niveau planification. Nous, il y a 2 ans, nous avons mis en place un plan d'action stratégique sur 6 ans, et l'axe, bien sûr, de food system, il est là, il est relié à l'infrastructure dans le cadre d'un développement économique local. Et je reviens à la Convention des maires. Ma ville aussi, elle a rejoint cette Convention des maires. Nous sommes maintenant 13 000 villes au niveau du monde, la Global Covenant of Mayors. Et bien sûr, le thème de food system, il est important. Il y a bien sûr cette question de data au niveau local, c'est un challenge. Ce n'est pas évident pour nous actuellement d'avoir les données au niveau local. On pourra les avoir au niveau national, au niveau régional. Mais local, c'est encore difficile. Mais nous travaillons sur ça, sur ce sujet-là. Donc voilà ce que je pourrais dire par rapport à des questions qui ont été posées.
Thank you very much for picking up on all of those questions. Vice Minister, would you like to address any of the questions?
Yes, just some underlining for youth and youth engagement, also because I think that we should need not to think about how to engage youth and young people, but how to realize an exchange, because young people are asking us to have courage, to be faster in our activity, to reply in a proper way to the question. And we can't reply to them saying we have to engage you. We have to be engaged to each other. And so our responsibility is to find a way to work together, not just to propose for you some educational plans. Also from this point of view, the pragmatical approach is very important, because I would like to do together with you something, not just to talk about something, maybe because we can also share the same ideas, but we have to share the same action, because we need to do something together to propose new habits in the community. And last not least, we have a lot of program, also financed program. I can mention one of them that Milan ran together with 16 other cities all over the world, above all in the European Union, called Food Wave. And this Food Wave, in some way, is a sort of an alliance between local authorities, NGOs, enterprises, and young people, driven by young people. Last month, we had a forum of Food Forum in Milan, driven by the community of Food Wave, together with us. I think it's very important not to, in some way, have this asymmetric way of thinking, but a cooperation between also a part of the city. And just a reply to Mr. I don't remember the name, but again, because differences in politics is one of the most important obstacle we have in cooperation. And this is the reason why, if you reinforce the network and the method is for every city and for every government, for every level, it's not a choice. So you can decide if you want or not to work together with the region or with the national government or with some other level you have to deal with, because the method is for all. It's not a political choice. And I think that this could be very useful also to avoid to decide if you can or not, but how. Maybe you can discuss also about how, but a step ahead you done.
Thank you for addressing that question also. Vice Minister, would you like to respond to any of the questions?
Sí, muchas gracias. Alguien tocó el tema de la gobernanza, ¿no? Y qué importante y tan necesario es ese término, no solamente en la administración pública, ¿no? Creo que todos nuestros actos deben ser regulados y qué mejor nosotros como representantes del Gobierno Nacional para impulsar este tipo de actos, este tipo de políticas en todas nuestras actividades, ¿no? Lo que nosotros siempre buscamos como Gobierno Nacional es llegar a los que más lo necesitan. Y nosotros, especialmente en el sector agrario, que en los últimos años hemos sido tan golpeados con tantos efectos adversos, ¿no? Como el tema del COVID. En nuestro país hemos sido bien golpeados este año con el tema de las inundaciones, las heladas, las sequías, ¿no? Imagínense con una gobernanza pues bien dada, con políticas, con normas bien estructuradas, los recursos pues bien destinados, los recursos bien administrados por las autoridades, sería pues un gran avance para que nuestro sector pueda salir adelante, ¿no? Eso es lo que podría aportar.
Thank you very much for making that critical point about, again, the role of the nation state. João, over to you to fill in any answered questions, but to lend weight to what's already been said.
Thanks, Karina. Look, several elephants have been brought into the room, right? On information systems, on power imbalances, infrastructure and regulations. But let me add two big elephants into the room. Bring two elephants into the room. One is about what do cities have to do with biodiversity loss and climate change. These questions have not been brought forward. And the fact is that if you look at the food system overall, it is responsible for 80% of the biodiversity loss and about 30% of climate change. And we generally tend to think that this is a supply side problem, right? So if farmers and fishers resolve the way they use or utilize and manage nature, these problems will be solved. Well, the fact is that if you take climate change only, the 30% of the food systems contribute to, if you improve production efficiency and change production technology, the mitigation potential of production is between 14 and 40%. But the food system has a demand side as well. And the demand side is, generally we talk about sustainable diets. And the mitigation potential for sustainable diets for climate change is up to 48%. And when you look at food loss and waste, it's 10%. So let's leave the production side alone and focus on food loss and waste and diets. This is an urban problem too, right? So whatever we do in cities is extremely important to reduce or address climate change and reverse the curve on biodiversity loss. It is extremely important that we align human and planetary health at all levels, global, national, and local systems. So the TERPS consortium works with cities to align human and planetary health. WWF, through our partnerships with GAIN and CARE, we do that as well. So cities are super important on the climate and biodiversity agendas. And of course, we count on the youth because the future belongs to them, right? So we need all the power that there is to change food systems now, before it's too late, because the planet is already facing tipping points. Thanks.
Thanks for making those really important points. Again, reinforcing the power of the importance of cities in food systems transformation. And in summing up, it seems that there is so much energy in this space. I have to say it's It's daunting to work in this space, but it's also a pleasure because there are so many committed people who are actually doing things. You made this point about the importance of actually doing things and learning from there, and that's what we're seeing in cities. And we're seeing these wonderful forms of solidarity emerging between mayors. And now we need to, from all around the world and the various networks that are able to do that, now we need to see that solidarity between the cities and their catchment areas and between the cities and the national governments. And we need analysis to do that. We need frameworks to do that. But above all, we need to act and we need to do. And certainly in the stocktake that this is, if we think about where we were 2 years ago in 2021, certainly there was a lot of work going on in this space prior to then, but there has, in my view, this panel has shown more than anything a distinct evolution in how we are thinking about cities and how we are framing the problems and framing the solutions. And I'd really like to thank the panelists for the active contribution they have made to that evolution. So if you could join me in thanking them. And thank you also for your very good questions, and do keep the energy going and keep up the momentum so in 2 years' time at the next stocktake we can report on further evolution and further change. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.